So, Carmen, I would like to ask you, what made you choose spirituality? What made you be on this path of transformation?
Thank you for asking me. It's a very important question because actually I noticed that spirituality chose me in the sense that I found it as a necessity of my soul somehow. Of my soul was looking for something deeper than I could find already outside. And I had some conversations even since I was little with my parents, and all the time the answers they were giving me were not satisfying me enough. For example, one of the things that I remember and stayed with me was that when my parents were arguing at some point, I said to my father, "Why are you arguing with my mother? She's an amazing woman, you shouldn't argue with her." And then he said to me, "Of course we are arguing, because this is what adults do. They just get married and then they just get tired and fed up with each other, and then they start to argue, and this is how it will be also for you when you will have a husband, and you will just argue with him, and that's how things are." And then I promised to myself in that moment that I will not do the same, that I will take this as a counterexample, and I will look for something more in the man that I will love. And when I found the spiritual path, let's say so, I did encounter the same values that I have. These values about harmony in relationships, about growing love more and more when you are with someone, and not this, let's say, fatidic idea that we are just meant to get bored and then everything gets just worse. So I'm an optimistic personality, and I like to think that actually things get better, and I like to see that things get better, and if they don't, I give up that path because it's not for me. So spirituality has this way of always improving us, of always bringing something more, even if it's through challenges, because we always try to overcome a little bit our limitations. We always try to be more today than we were yesterday. And this, for me, even if it's not easy most of the times, it's very satisfying in the end. And especially when I draw a line and I look at my past and I see that I went through this struggle and that challenge and another test, but in the end I gained a lot of experience, and now that experience helps me a lot to have a more, let's say, mature and wise perspective of my life and influences my actions in a very good way.
I remember a moment when I was working and I was having a break, and in the break I saw a bird, and I was looking to that bird, and I had such a beautiful awakening inside of my heart regarding that living being, and identifying myself with the same source that I was seeing in that bird. And I was like feeling that I want to be free and I want to taste the freedom. That was like happening around when I was 18 years old. But later on I received a book which was written by Jiddu Krishnamurti, and I remember how that book offered me such a profound perspective and openness and at the universal scale about what is actually spirituality. Like, then it was the moment when I started to realize that in fact spirituality is much wider than a religion or anything that I thought. Also, my parents were fighting a lot. I grew up with the parents that were fighting almost every day. And when they were not fighting, I was like really feeling lucky for those times when we have peace in the house. Mm-hmm. And it was really difficult to live like that, and it was affecting me very much. And also harmony was really the number one thing that I was searching for. also outside but also inside. And I was just questioning myself why I have these parents or this situation in my life, because I was seeing that others, it was so beautiful in their families, and I was wishing also to have a more, I don't know, more happy time in my family. Of course, it was not all the time, but a lot of time. It was a lot of fights. And that made the whole childhood and even adolescence quite difficult for me. But indeed, all these hard times made me always search for something beyond, like for some, to understand why was happening everything that happened. All these situations from that I encountered in my family made me search for a spiritual path that will offer me exactly those practices, that knowledge, that understanding to discover myself within. And I feel, after all these years, I feel very lucky having the family that I had, the father and the mother that I have, for all the fights that they had and we had also, in order to find this spiritual path, and in general finding the profoundness and the more, like, that unseen, that mystery that is beyond this physical reality, that is closer to me now. And of course there is a lot more to discover.
And I agree that the difficulties that we experienced when we were younger, I'm sure that also for you, as for me, as I feel, is that now it helps me also know what I don't want in my life, to be very attentive of the quality of relationships in my life and of my belief system and everything. And on the other hand, it helps me to appreciate, for example, when there is harmony, when there is love, when there is transformation. Now I appreciate much more because I know the difference, and I see through contrast how it could have been for me if maybe I wouldn't have encountered the spiritual path, and maybe I would just adopt all these normal social standards and beliefs. Like, for example, that jealousy is something that shows that you love someone, which is a faulty belief. So spirituality says the opposite. It says that you can love 100% and you can be jealous 0%. And you can be jealous 100% and love 0%. And of course, the next step is that apart from these things, apart from clearing up this area of the human being, which is the emotional part, which is a strong part for us humans, is that it takes you further. It takes you further than psychology or any kind of therapy or other kind of systems of self-knowledge, and it leads you deeper to the essence, where actually we have a part of us that is beyond any kind of thoughts and emotions and feelings and reactions. And it leads us slowly to get to that. That is the purpose, and it's very clearly stated.
Yes, and also when I reached spirituality, when I actually started yoga practice, and to understand the knowledge and all the lessons that were coming across, I was realizing more and more how spirituality and yoga and tantra are basically containing everything, all the, let's say, religion. It's like a synthesis of everything that I knew and I heard about it. It was somehow bringing together all the paths somehow. At least this is how I was feeling, that I was containing them inside those, or I was taking from each part of the practice that I was doing and the knowledge that I was having, different aspects that were coming together as an universal belief, as an universal understanding upon everything that made everything so complex and in the same time giving a very wide perspective upon everything. But now before we continue further with the subject that we chose today, I would like to ask you, how was the moment when you clearly chose to start on a spiritual path in connection with your family? How they took it? Because I know a few very funny and interesting stories about it, and maybe you can tell us.
Yes, now it's funny, but back then it was not funny at all. It was quite difficult. Because I was a minor, so I was under 18 years old, but I wanted to do certain things and they didn't actually agree with them, even if they weren't bad things. So I was always the quiet child that was not skipping classes, that I never drank alcohol or tried smoking, or I wasn't going to parties or disco or hanging out until late. But instead I found yoga, and they thought that yoga is much worse than all this. So at some point, because the situation got very intense after 1 month of going, after starting to go to the yoga courses, they wanted me to quit, and it was, for me, this option didn't actually exist, to quit. So I had to somehow do it in a way that would allow me to continue, but also not to trigger them more. So then I told my parents that each Friday evening, when supposedly I had the class, that I was going to the disco and I was putting on heavy makeup and this kind of disco clothes, you know, for party, and I was leaving around 8 and I was coming back at 11, and they were asking me how was the party, and I was telling them I drank alcohol and everything, and they were fine with it, so surprisingly. But kind of
such a paradox, like you mentioned that there are parents that would never ever agree for their children to go to the disco, like to be other way around. They would prefer that their children to stay nicely home to do something healthy for their lives, as even yoga practice. At least this is how the more Western society would do, or family. And yeah, here in your case it was a completely opposite situation.
Yes, and it was hard also with the part of letting go of eating meat, because I stated very clearly, even though my mother was cooking for everyone, that I don't want meat in my food anymore. And then she was chopping the meat so small so that I couldn't really remove it from my food. And
Wow.
It was such a process just to separate the meat from my food. And also, whenever I received something with meat, I was just giving it to some stray dogs, and that was it, because they just didn't accept that I don't eat meat. And of course, it's not something in the common culture to be vegetarian, especially back then, 13 years ago, and in my country, in Romania, being vegetarian was still something very exotic somehow. And people still thought that if you become a vegetarian, you will become skinny, or you will have health problems, or you will not have enough protein, and you know, these kind of theories that circulate, and that they are not true at all, but it requires a bit of study. So this is how it was, the process. Then it became, when I turned 18, it became easier, because I felt this legal pressure was not so much on me. And until then, I had to lie many times. And I lied because I was going to do a meditation, for example, and I had to lie that I'm going out with a friend, but actually I was going to a meditation. And how was it for you when you started on the spiritual path? Did your parents agree, or how was it?
In the beginning, I was not saying much at home. I was just going to my class every week. It was not a big difference. Like the big transformation came later on, also when I started to be a vegetarian, around 4 or 5 months after I started in the yoga course, and I was very eager to let go of the meat. And of course I was living with my mother and my father back then, and of course for my mother was very difficult as well to accept that I want to be vegetarian, and she was just freaking out, basically thinking what I'm gonna eat. And even for myself it was quite difficult to know what to eat, because I didn't know, I didn't have like I was not reading, I didn't know where to search, even that I had the internet, but then back then the internet was not necessarily, or I didn't know how to find stuff. And I took it slowly, and I started to have more and more friends that were yogis, and I was learning from them directly what to eat, and we were together, or sometimes they were cooking, and I had this direct initiation from them in this respect. But what was very striking for me in the beginning of my spiritual path was that comparing to you, before I started to be on the yoga practice, let's say, I was a party girl. I was going to all, like, as many parties as possible, even from Thursday to Saturday, like 3 times a week. But back then, that circle of friends was very much only in connection with partying. And when I started to practice yoga and to become more and more spiritual, I witnessed this huge difference inside of myself, of course, because of the resonance, and I was not choosing anymore to hang out with them. I didn't feel anymore to be in an environment where people are smoking and drinking. Somehow it separated me from them naturally, because I actually felt that my life was very superficial, and it was very superficial. And I gradually found more and more friends and people with whom to meet and share the same aspiration for awakening ourselves and find our spiritual purpose in life in time afterward. When it comes that moment to clearly choose that we want to be on a spiritual path, we want to discover ourselves and practice more techniques that will find us closer to ourselves. It will be like that. We will always be in a journey with people, as long as we conclude and we finalize what we have to learn with them, because this is what relationships are. In fact, I see them as little journeys that we have together for a period of time until we accomplish something, and then we move on and we go to the next one, to the next level. And in the same way, when we are finishing what we have to learn together with other people, we move on. And this doesn't change what we have inside for them. It's just that a journey ends, but another continues. So when we are choosing spirituality as our path in life, we should be full of courage and full of optimism, and to follow our intuition, because as women, we have that inner call. Intuition is that godly inspiration that is showing us and telling us and offering us that safety, what we need, and everything that we need in order to follow that. And from there we extract all the power, all the understanding, all the keys on how to continue and how to reach that what we need.
And we want to encourage and hopefully inspire you that if you have an inner quest, let's say, and probably you do since you're watching this video and you managed to reach so far, that if you have this inner search for something more fulfilling and more profound, to follow it with courage and not to give up, even if in the beginning there will be very strong difficulties, because it's worth it, and you will see the effects and how your life will improve if we choose something that is better for us, that is healthier for us. And try and see on your own without letting yourself influenced by something that your friends might say or your family. First try to see the effects on you and then draw a conclusion. That is how I did, and that is how I think that we should test anything in life that is good, so that we have this inner faith that it is good for us and we don't do it out of other reasons. So once you feel that you are meant for a spiritual path, go and follow it to the end. And we wish you divine wisdom to follow all your superior goals in life.